Good afternoon on a sunny spring, well, late February. Don't get too excited, it isn't spring yet, but late February day. And welcome to the old shed of reloved guitars. And what have we got here? Well, we've got, do you know what, who likes to try and undo these silly case tags? Find the way to undo them, please. What we have here is an uncooperative little tag, which frankly it's going to take me forever to try and undo this way because I can't get a grip on it. Yeah, we've got Harley Benton Fusion, left-handed Fusion guitar. It's one of their top of their line range things. Come on. Oh boy. It's actually dark fuzzy cotton, so you can't see what you're doing. Oh look, there's a chance of getting it undone. Yeah. Right. What does it say? Oh, it just says Harley Benton. Alright. So we have here their Fusion range guitar. The model number is Pro Series. Oh, I can't remember the model number, it doesn't say. Anyway, Pro Series Fusion guitar. And this is this roasted maple neck sort of arrangement. It's got Roswell pickups, Wilkinson WVS 50 UK, no 52K, 50, I don't know, 52K anyway. A bridge from Wilkinson. Tremolo bridge. It has got a coil tap by the looks of it, and a 5-position switch. And this is in left-handed mode, but it's a pretty looking thing. This has a couple of little blemishes which I've already kind of photographed and shown Mark. But anyway, the thing is, this is the second one that's come here. The first one came here with a backbowed neck that wouldn't play at all. Now it was fixable by adjusting the heel-mounted truss rod. However, despite it being fixable, it didn't instill confidence in the customer, which is understandable because for all we know it could have been still drying out, or who knows why it got through QC like that. Theoretically it couldn't be, I mean it's not good either which way. If it got through and was already back bowed so it couldn't play at all, then that's terrible QC. If it got through QC, was playing and then back bowed in transit or in retail storage or wherever it goes, in the warehouse, that's pretty terrible too. So either which way, on the basis of QC and or subsequent bending, the customer was not confident, so requested a replacement, which I think is fair. This one came through, and just as a kick-off, I've had a look at all the various little blemishes that are on here, and there are a few. There's some overspill of the lacquer on the headstock, so where the gloss bleeds through onto the satin or the matte finish. It's more matte actually, the matte finish. There's a couple of little blemishes here and there on the finish, and there was also up here there's a kind of little raised bit of finish where something's not been sanded back properly, and it's just a slight annoyance, but it's feelable, so we're going to take that back, and the customer knows that there may be a bit of discoloration there, just to avoid it. Now, of course, on the left-handed guitar it's on the thumb side, so it's less noticeable than, you know, on the underside for the playing the fretting hand. But if you get, well, sorry, no, wrong. It's high up on the thumb side anyway for a left-hander, but it's less, what I mean, it's on the top edge rather than the bottom edge, which would definitely be more pronounced. Anyway, so what we've got here is not a cheap guitar by any means. There are tiny blemishes here and there, nothing too major. One of them is a little bit of cracking of the lacquer around this tremolo post. There's some general detritus in these holes, but that's sort of fair, part of the course. There's a bit of what looks like super glue sweat here, but it's rubbing off now. I don't think it's anything particularly bad. So there's two things really to do with this guitar. One is to set it up, and it's going to get set up with 8s on it, which is probably a gauge lighter than these. which isn't a problem. I'm going to do the setup work with these on because they're sacrificial strings, but obviously we're going to need to set the tremolo, etc. and the relief separately for the loading of a set of 8s, which are going to be lighter. But as far as the fret leveling part on the setup's concerned, it doesn't really matter if you do it with a 10 or 11s or 9s or whatever, as long as you know that the loading is going to be different afterwards. Technically, the amount of difference in how the compression makes the frets individually react is very, 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 very slight. But I'm not going to waste £5 worth of new strings by putting 8s on here. I need to take them off, throw them away and put more 8s on. The percentage of difference is minuscule. The important bit will be to just get it all leveled out. Now, the thing to notice about this here guitar is so it's a nice looking thing. It's not cheap, which is why Mark had every right to send back the original one. It actually has what looks like a new bone or tusk. Actually, it already has a tusk nut fitted. So this may be this was one of the things that he wanted fitted, but actually I think that's, judging by that, that's already fitted. So we just make sure that's correct, set to the right first fret action, which doesn't look actually too bad at all at the moment. It's maybe a little high action down here, for which we have a mixture of individual saddle heights, adjustable saddle heights, and also, of course, you've always got the two bridge mounting pins available to use if you ever need to do a kind of gross height adjustment. One of the things I've noticed about this straight away, which has got me a little concerned, is the return to tune on the tremolo is showing up in my ears as not being great, which is a real shame. So let's just, I won't put it on the thing for a minute, let's put it on the flat on the desk. So let's go and tune this to an A. Close to. Okay. Flat. Sharp by miles. Yeah, it's not good. I don't think that has to do, I have a horrible feeling that doesn't have to do with the nut slots, but I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, because if it is to do with the basic working of the tremolo, then that's not a good sign. It's not a good sign. So right away, you saw that on there. You can hear it as well, but that's a sort of typical finding. Now, I'm not by any means an expert on anything, far less Floyd Rose tremolo systems. But what I do know is the point of a quality tremolo system, especially a 2-point floating one, any floating tremolo, is that it has to return to playing action. Now it does in one direction. Yeah, okay, that's fine. But now it's locking, when you go back, it's locking as sharp. Now, I could be wrong. This it may have something to do with terrible slack still in these strings, but I have a worrying feeling that it isn't that. And so what I'm going to do, just to begin with, I'm just going to have a look and see if I can stretch out as much of the slack in these strings as possible. It won't hurt to do that. Now conveniently that's upside down, so now that I can actually have the jack plug sticking out, not on the ground while I do this. So and this is going to, obviously, being unplayed strings, and they will not have been really stretched in the factory or wherever. So we're going to get a load of slack out of the string train. Forget it's not in the actual string, even if it is or isn't, we're just pulling it out of the string train. Okay, so it's floating, so it's going to be moving all over the place. It's going to take a while to obviously stabilise the tuning, because it's going to have to reach its equilibrium. But it's a very common floating tremolo or tremolo problem. Now, funnily enough, I just did a parts caster for a customer, and we used a Wilkinson 6-screw tremolo bridge into an old body with re-drilled holes. And didn't have this problem at all. Flat. Sharp. Way flat. That's G sharp sharp. That's A sharp, sharp of A. G sharp sharp. A natural, or A in tune, whatever you call it. Goes back. Right. So the downward push returns to tune. Cool. Backwards pull leaves it sharp. Nearly a semitone. So actually it's about a semitone, that's terrible. So there we are, A. Now I can pull it back. So what we're looking for is B flat. No, it's about 50% of a, I don't know what it's called in cents, but I guess if it's 100 cents per interval, I don't know, but you can hear it and you can see it. Return to tune, out. So that's not great, and at times in the past that I've had guitars that do this, I've never been able to find a solution other than I think John's Charvel Gary Moore guitar. I think what I ended up doing, I replaced the block with a higher mass block and it worked out. But that was about the only time in several other occasions where I've used different quality, varying degrees of copy, duplicate, fake tremolo systems. I wasn't successful, frankly. So let's just have a look. Well, we've got what should be a fairly high mass block, but it's a real pain. If I can't find something that's obviously stopping that returning to pitch in both directions, then we have a problem, because it's unplayable in, for a tremolo operator. You can't go in both directions and then be out of tune. It's just pointless. Now, I'd love to say it's the nut, because that would be an easy solution, but in the past it hasn't turned out to be that. Yeah, nothing obvious. Bits of gunge everywhere. Square block, nothing's touching anything particularly. When we operate it, it's fairly smooth, or it should be clear of everything. That's just how it returns on the knife point. You can actually see the difference in the angle it sits. So that's something that's really amazing. I suspect this will be common to all of them, so I'm going to have to go back. Whoa, this is something else. Oh, I'm going to get my close-up thing out. I've got a special close-up thing. There are so many splatters around this this hole, these little pilot holes, which have been done before a clear coat has been applied or something, and then the clear coat's been sprayed over this sort of shrapnel. Very odd. But hey, and some people will go, oh look, you've been hypercritical of Harley Bentons again, like I've got something in, you know, I've got a grudge. I don't. I'm just, you know, I have a, quite understandably, an exacting customer who is kind of expecting something a bit out of the ordinary, the Harley Benton ordinary for his money, and fairly understandable too. But there you go, there's a, looks like the surface of the moon. Now having zoomed that in, that's a bit, kind of looks extreme and over the top, but it's just, you can't figure out what process made that. As I say, there's nothing I can see in here that would immediately cause that problem, or cause that to be a problem. It should move freely. You know, I've got the, what do they call it, the macro lens. Oops, macro lens on at the moment, which is quite cool. This little adapter I got for a tenner. Excuse me. But it also lets me zoom in on things that I couldn't otherwise see. Stick there. Nice. Like I say, this is worrying me, because this is tusk, and unless we have got some string hang up in this region here, there's no reason why. I mean, sorry, I'm rambling a bit. As always, you see this arrangement here. The strings are quite deeply in the slots, all right, and it could be this is a reason why this is binding up. And I think the only thing we can really do in this situation, before I go and put any more time and effort into this, because I need to speak to Mark briefly about this, you know, because the bottom line is, if I'm going to go and set him up, oh yeah, hang on, we could have a problem here. If I'm going to set him up a guitar and charge him good money for the investment in setting it up, I've got to have a sort of point at which I say to him, you know what, I think this is not making sense at the moment. So I'm going to just zoom in on this and kind of show a close up, if I can get it. Okay, this is the tusk-ish nut. I'll give you a look at this, because it is quite a pretty cool close-up thing going on here. That's very deep for starters, so there is a possibly there's a very great likelihood that it would be grabbing hold of that that string and stopping it retuning. So the thing I'm going to do while we've got this on here, I have replacement tusk nuts if necessary, but I'm going to have a look at this first of all and just see how deep a slot we've got here, and it is pretty extreme. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this nut slot down to a civilized level in terms of making a slot out of it, and I'm going to just round it out with my file here. Now I don't really want to take it down any much further, if at all. I just want it freed up so that the string sits in it, and I know that it's going to move freely. Now I could do I've done this before, I do a whole little talk about why these deep tool slot shaped slots are crap, and there's a reason for it. And I was talking to, in fact I was drawing it out on the board yesterday. JT was here picking up his guitar, and we went through it because he brought down some Hosco fret leveling files to leave with me, which I'm going to do a little video on later on, and perhaps really should have just started doing it now. Now what I'm interested in, stick it on a chromatic tuner. I'm going to do this again, and again I'm not going to use the press on the neck for this. I'm going to see, I was going to stick it in the other side. Oh. So let's get this into, tune it to E. Close enough. Okay, down, and it's flat. Let's just try and stretch it out a bit since it's being loosened off. Okay, fractionally frat, but I'm gonna still give it some stretching. What I'm trying to see is if these slots, as I suspect, maybe, I'm hoping they're the source of this, as much of a problem as we've got here. It'd be a great thing to prove or to demonstrate to you if it's the case. I'm not entirely sure that it is. I wish it was. Okay, we're sort of stabilised on E like before when pressing down. No, it's not the slots. It's the reset of this. You can see it. I can see the reflections are different each time. It's resetting to a different angle. I was kind of hoping that it would be the result of the strings binding in the slots, because they are cut too deep. That's an absolute fact. But it doesn't appear to be the answer to my prayers. So we have, I mean, they are too deep anyway, and that's not good. What I would want to do is basically file these off down to a lower, basically take this nut even lower. There's no point. Currently what we've got is, I need to draw this out yesterday, sorry. Currently what we've got is we've got a nut made of tusk that goes like that, exaggerating, but the string's there, which is no good at all. What I was just doing then was that, okay, using the V file and rounding out the bottom with the correct nut file. I was doing that so that reduced the friction there, which hopefully meant the only real friction would be at this point here, which is better than all the way up the sides as well, kind of like that. But having kind of widened it up, it hasn't done anything. Now the best thing you can really do with this is to ultimately take all of that away, which is currently a meaningless amount of excess tusk. Whether it's tusk or bone, you obviously want to take away as much of that as possible to leave only a small amount of, enough for it to not jump sideways when you bend a string, but you don't want, you want as little contact as possible to reduce the amount of friction. And this arrangement right here is that they are below the surface of the nut, which is a problem. So what I would need to do anyway with this nut is to file this right back. You know, now while we're at this, there's no, well, I was going to say there's no reason not to do it right now, but the problem is, if my theory's correct and this isn't the slots, because they don't feel actually, well, I say they don't feel too bad. Having cleared this one out and being fairly clear about it, we've got a fairly wide gauge slot cut through there now. That what have we got coming overhead? Oh no, the helicopter. That's a Robinson, of course. It's funny, I didn't recognise the engine noise. Right. Yeah, so having done that one string, I mean, it could be that all the other strings are holding up the whole thing. Technically, that's, I guess, the best it's coming around again. The best I can do in one go before I kind of report this as a real problem. Why is he coming over again? Yeah. Move the shed this way now. So let me just do this, since we're gonna I want to rule this out before I give up on the actual bridge itself. So for this one, I mean, that's deep down in the hole. So I'm just basically using the V-notch file just to take down the edges of the slot to a point where I can be fairly confident the strings are able to move through, and it is well overcut. Oh, I mean, the problem is you can cut it down to get the correct first fret action. There's no, that's presumably what they've aimed to do here, which is a good thing to do. But in doing so, they've left the strings buried in a vertical slot, as per my little diagram, which we don't want under really any circumstances, because that increases the potential friction. So the aim of this for now is just to reduce that as much as possible, so that we have a clear movement of the strings. Now, if we can achieve that, and we can test the tuning again and it improves it, then we can say, right, that's partly where the problem lay. I'm not a great fan of tusk in some ways as a material to cut. It's absolutely fine as a lubricated substance. You know, their claims are good and all that. It just doesn't work for me as a material to cut with, certainly not with the files. So I can see that even cutting down now, that the depth of that slot that I've cut with the file, the nut file, or no, the V file, is quite a lot. So what I've just done is it looks messy down there now because there are lots of V notches in the end, and I would need to file down, reduce the nut to get rid of those slots, i.e. take all the excess material away. But I'm now trying to do the simplest elimination of problems. Yeah, eliminate the obvious things. I hate these string trees as well. Nope, it's the tremolo. Okay, so I think I need to stop and reconsider this. Like I say, from previous experience, I don't know much that's possible to do that makes a difference to this. You're working with an incredibly small number of possibilities here. I don't even know if this is this even... No, it's not touching the wood. It shouldn't be a problem. It's away from it. It sits at the front edge, on the knife edge, and that's your lot. Okay, so right now I don't see a solution to this. I'm going to go and take a quick look around, because there's no point, in my book, there's no point spending more time on something no. Pause. Okay, welcome to Really Love Guitars, and this is a short, quick segment. I've run afoul of reviewing things in the past, so I tend not to review, because as soon as you review something you tend to upset somebody, even if you're being incredibly complimentary. Anyway, but this one's interesting for me because, having done this now for 4 or 5 years, the issue of nut files is not contentious exactly, it's expensive, right? So in the past I went out and I bought myself a pile of Hiroshima nut files from a Canadian seller, but they're made in Japan made, and they were, at that time, they were about 60 quid a set. And anyway, I bought a set of 9s thinking, well, okay, I'll get a set of 10s when I can afford it. And I found that when I cut the nuts with a set of 9s, the strings would stick, and I'd end up constantly having to oversize the slots. And then it occurred to me that if you were cutting a 9s in a microscopically thin thing, then you might get away with using a 9 and the string would flow through it smoothly. But because the files are bendy, and because the nut has a certain depth, I suppose, or thickness that way down the neck, you end up with a very fine file. You end up getting a kind of snaky line. It's almost impossible to avoid, and it's microscopic, but it's enough to rob you of the clearance. Now the point about it is, if you cut with a 9 gauge, there is no clearance on a 9 gauge string, so you're kind of on a loser. So you don't buy a 9 gauge for a 9 gauge set for a 9 gauge string. And then I went and bought a 10 gauge and found even that was leaving the strings sticky. So then what I realized is I needed an 11, and I finally ended up getting a 12 to 53, which I use for pretty much everything now. And if I end up putting a set of 11s on, for example, I'd probably still need to do a little bit of work to widen the slots. So I've ended up with a set of nut files which are based around at least 2 gauges bigger than I mostly use, but it works perfectly well. And the reason it does is because, if you think about it, these things, when they're made in the factory, they're made to accommodate probably the highest gauge of string that anyone would reasonably use, like a 13, for example. Now they're not going to make a nut that sticks as soon as you put a 13 in it, so they make them capable. And what it means is that a typical nut will have other things wrong with it, including the height of it and where it's positioned and so on, but a standard manufactured nut, not this one, but a standard manufactured nut will come out of the factory capable of taking a much higher gauge of strings than you normally take. And what it means is, when you put a much lower gauge in and it still plays fine, you can see that the margin for size difference is very generous. You can put a small gauge and a larger 13 slot, a 9 gauge string and a 13 slot, and it will not buzz or jump around and do stupid things. So the idea of having 1 gauge of files for each size is ridiculous anyway, because you can use a larger set and everything will fall within that. It's also stupid for the reasons I've just said, that these flexible little bendy things cutting through a nut that's about 3 mils in depth is never going to cut a straight line. The thinner they are, the less it is. Also, what they also do, these little files, so by the way, here's my set of my final kind of oversized set, which I've now clamped between dead blunt blades in order to keep these straight. That's the only hope I've got of keeping them straight. And then JT came over yesterday and we did some work on his guitar. And while he was here, he said, I'd kind of advised him to get these, and he showed me these. They came from G&W Guitars and Woods in Portugal, which a supplier I use a lot. And these are made by Hosco, also made in Japan. And these are 6 different sides, and they kind of double over on each other. So we have a 10 and a 26, then we have a 13 and a 17, and then the other side goes back on the other side. Anyway, so here we have, if I can see it with my blunt eyes, we have 2 gauges here. We have a very fine one, which is the 10 gauge, and we have a thicker one, which is the, I presume it's a bit like following the Rotor Sound string colours. It's back down to this one, the D. Okay. Now the thing about this is, basically we were chatting about this yesterday, and I was saying to him why I thought these would be a good idea. And the diagram I used was, excuse the wiring diagrams, but the diagram I used was this one here. Now what I said to him, if I start again, what I said to him was, what happens is if you end up cutting with a nut slot file like the Japanese ones here, right, you get a vertical slot with the string at the bottom. Now the reason my guitar setups, or any guitar setup, hopefully if you do it right, you'll end up aiming for an action of X amount above the fret, right? And that's what you're kind of you're aiming to leave this string so much above the fret surface, okay? And that's what you do. So basically you cut down until you get that. Now chances are, because of the way they build nuts in the factory and so on, you'll end up with a string sitting quite the way down in a slot, and that means you're going to have friction on the string for the reasons I said anyway, because first of all, the slot typically is never really wide enough, even if you use the gauges I use. But even if you use a wider gauge, you're going to end up with potential for the string binding, and not least because that's in 2D, but if you think about it as a 3D shape, you think, okay, there's my slot, right? And you go, the string is now going through there, okay? And you think, well, your 10 versus my 12 versus the 9 string, surely there's loads of room. Well, that would be true, except the truth is, it doesn't go like that, it goes like this, okay? And so that 10 kind of goes round corners and ends up catching quite nicely on that wiggly, microscopically wiggly thing. So you're still left with this thing that unless you use an adjustable nut, which I more and more do, you're still left with the need on a typical guitar like this to cut downwards. There's your fret, there's your nut, there's what they've done to begin with. They say, here's your string, and you go, whoa, wait a minute, this is way too high, that's 1 mil or something silly. And you know you were aiming for 0.3. So you've got to cut downwards, right? But you don't want that vertical slot for the reasons I said, but you've still got to come down. So what I've suggested is, what you really want is a notch, right? And the reason you want a notch is because you want something that opens up away from the string. So if you're going to leave it at all in the bottom with your correct action, you don't want anything pinching it. So the way to guarantee that it doesn't pinch is that it opens up above. And you can do that with a file like this, which is cool because it's very cheap. The problem with that is it leaves you with a little thing at the bottom, which potentially your string will get stuck in that wedge. So the ideal situation is to be able to cut something that's the right shape at the bottom, to cup, a little kind of string shaped half moony thing with a widening thing at the top, sort of V-notch going away from it. And then wouldn't that be the ideal thing? And then you would move down to there and you'd do the same, ending up with nice kind of thing at the bottom where your string sits. All of them at the right height above the fret. That's the ideal situation if you have to cut. And I looked at that and I thought, oh blimey, that's kind of what I'm trying to make there with my thing, right? Except it doesn't have that. It still only has the straight walled slot. So this is why I recommended these to JT, because you won't be able to see it very well, but actually they do. They are exactly that shape in cross section, end on. No matter how thin this bit at the bottom is, they are essentially that's cross section. And as soon as I saw them when he brought them over yesterday, I thought, damn, why didn't I buy those? And these are £70 compared to what he priced up now for the Japanese nut files that I still use at currently about 130 quid for a set that he was looking for. So I said that I would give these a go. Now, a slight problem about this is in giving them a go, this nut on this guitar here has already been cut at the factory, and it wasn't bad, but it wasn't brilliant. Let me just check. It's fractionally over. And the reason I wanted to do a quick test with this right now is because the problem I'm having with this guitar is straight off. This is the second one we've had in, but it's beside the point, kind of. But the problem we've got with it is that the tremolo isn't straight on the bench, brand new. The tremolo doesn't return to tune. So the first thing I wanted to do before I contacted the customer was to rule out the nut slots grabbing it. Now what I could see straight away is that these slots were cut very deep, and like in my first picture, the strings were sitting right at the bottom of a very tight slot, cut in the conventional way with a vertical thin file. Now that was done in the factory, and they in doing so they did get a pretty good first fret action, which is clearly what they were aiming to do. But what they didn't do, which I would do, is once they've found the right action, they need to take all of this excess material off, right down to the point where the strings are just sitting in a cup, if you like, because you won't mess up the bottom, you know, i.e. the first fret action height, but what you'll do is you'll take away the material that's sitting up there that could grip the sides of the strings, and that's what they didn't do. So what I thought with this is we'll start as if I was doing this, and we'll test these out for the first time. Now I know JT hasn't used these, so I'm going to begin with this big chunky 46, which will be your standard 10 string, and I'm going to take this off and I'm just going to get a quick go how it feels. Now the beauty of this is that it's the same cross section all the way down, so I can use it up here if I can reach, or I can use it down this end if I can't, and it has a bit of a curve so that I don't end up banging into the deck when I'm using it. So the first thing to note is I'm going to do it at a little backwards angle, and I've never used these before, so I'm just going to have a little feel and then drop the string back in and remeasure. Now if I get this wrong, it's fine, I've got a spare tusk nut to work with if I need to. That's about on the mark. I'm going to stop there. Then I'll switch to the next biggest size, which will be the fat side of the this one, and I'll do the A string, and again check beforehand. So this really, I'm just using these, have already cut them with the other files a bit, but I'm just using this to sort of bottom out the slots and clean them out and see how these feel to use. I like the feel of it already. Yeah, we're on the mark there. And then we go to the 26, and these helpfully, the numbers pertain to the correct side, so you read them the right way up and you're pointing at the right side, correct side I should say. So now I'm going to use, oh I didn't test this one. Now the thing about this is nearly there. The thing about this situation with this guitar at the moment is once I've just cleaned these out to demonstrate these new files, I'm then going to have to go and make a call on the functioning of the tremolo. But either which way we go, it doesn't matter. This is worth doing anyway, just to kind of rule out what the problem would be. So 10, 17, 13, 17, so it's this direction. Okay, I've got to get the right ones. So we go 17, 13 and 10. So we'll go 17 on the G, and we'll just check it. A little bit of room. This is on my setting of 0.3. So a nice little cut. Ooh, I like it. We'll get it down to the correct action. So I'm just basically tilting back at the same angle as the strings themselves, the neighbouring strings go over the nut. So this is cleaned out. First of all, it's cleaned out the kind of dark garbage that my previous that's quite have a look at that. Yeah, it's cleaned out the garbage that my previous files had used, and it's basically making the slot look a lot cleaner. Okay, right. That's probably a fraction too much, but I don't mind on this point, because really what I'm doing here is I'm testing out the principle of this thing. So I'm going to now go to the 13. Very simple cut. Again, that one's a fraction. Yeah, it's just on the mark, but you have to. It's one of these things you'd have to get used to how these cut. I'm just doing this a little bit quickly to prove the point, or to make a point. Okay. I hate these string trees, these metal ones, and that's going to be replaced if we keep the guitar. Okay, so the point about doing this was I wanted to check the tuning, so let's go back to this. Let's tune up. Plug it in, that would help. Okay, that was just I guess a test of the files. D sharp. So what we're looking for is any one of these strings and how it relates to tuning. Flat. Okay, it's not the nut slots that's the problem. Okay, so just a quick look at this. That tells me I've got a problem with the tremolo on this, so we'll deal with that separately. Anyway, I'll hang this up. But the point being is, I recommend these Hosco nut files. I really do. They're simple, they're really quick, and actually at the moment they're outlasting the cutting power on these. Now, to be fair, I've had these off and on for some time, and you know, I think I've turned them around once, these, since new. And what I tend to do is also get a little bit of a wire brush wherever it's gone. I find the wire brush if I can. I don't know if I can find the wire brush, and then clean out the teeth as much as possible to try and keep it unclogged. But for £70 or thereabouts, I recommend these. And if you are, I don't know what the sets they are they sell, but if you're somebody who either plays normally with 9s and 10s, these are actually going to give you a straighter slot, so I think you could get away with the 10s of this set. I think it's probably a good choice. But I would say about these is, providing they cut as well as they seem to, providing they continue cutting, and providing you perhaps take care to clean the slots out as much as possible. This isn't the right brush, and I can't find the other one. You know, gently, a brass sort of toothed brush is probably what works best. If you can keep them, here it is, staring me in the face. Yeah, keep those teeth, you know, cleaned up so there's no bone or tusk material in there. Do it after you've used it each time. Then you keep that sharp. But I think these represent a really good buy, and I would certainly be looking at. I'd be looking at a set of these, and that's for the simple reason they're the right profile. They do everything that I do with these two tools right now. and that's a bit kind of crude, and that's still a little bit crude. The thing about this you'd need to do with this file, these files, as well as with the way I've been doing it, is whichever you use, you're still left, when you've achieved the correct first fret action, which I haven't now on this guitar, particularly because of the, trying it out for the first time on there, but once you've got to the correct action, then when you take the strings off, you need to sand down your nut so that you take away the what's showing as V notches from this particular profile of the file, because you don't need any of this material above half the way point of the string, so you can get rid of all of this. Now it does make it makes your nut look incredibly low, but that's all you need. Any nut material above the string is not only pointless, but actually it's counterproductive, because it's going to it risks causing friction. So having done that fairly crudely to begin with, my conclusion is that the problem with this is more the tremolo itself, which I wanted to rule out the nut first, so that's done. The problem is the tremolo, so we're going to need to go and research this and or report back and see what Mark wants to do. Okay.